Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. I'm a 3D motion design freelancer, and this is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today we're going to 3D model some chocolate and melt it using the Melt Deformer. We'll go through all the settings for the Melt Deformer inside of Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and get started. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. The first thing to do is to use Control D for PC or Command D for Mac, depending on what kind of computer you have, to open up your scene settings. And then in here, you can go into scale and adjust this to be inches. And then another thing to do is to make sure that our display units also match. So preferences, units, and I'll work in inches. You can work in any units you'd like. I'm using inches for today, and I'll go ahead and drop in a plane. So now that we have our handy dandy plane, we're not going to have a piece of chocolate that's 400 inches by 400 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to, let's say, 3 by 8 inches, and I'll zoom in here to see our chocolate. We could even probably try 4 inches. That seems nice. And I will turn on garage shading lines so that we can see our segments here. Now I'm basing the segments on how many pieces of chocolate we want to be in this to break off. So I will change the width segments to be 4, height segments to be 8. And we can see how this feels. I may try 3.5 because I'm just feeling that look for our chocolate. So now that we've done that, we have that all set up. We can use the hotkey C to make this editable, or we can go ahead and hit this button over here. So I'll go ahead and hit this button, and it makes our plane a polygonal object so that now we can use our different modeling modes to adjust it. Now, the first thing that I will do is go into polygon mode. I want to select all the polygons here, so I'm going to use Bevel Selection. The hotkey for that is UF. You can find most of the hotkeys using either the U or the M, and once you do that, you'll see them listed. Like if I select U, you can see the additional options for what you could select after that, and F is Bevel Selection. So I'll go ahead and select in here. Now we're going to need to extrude this. The hotkey for the extrude is MT. And we can choose how much we're going to extrude this with the offset. So I will change this to 0.125, and that's how much we'll offset it. I want to create caps so that there isn't a hole at the bottom. That means that it will fill this in once I hit apply. So you can see that's filled in down there because I had create cap selected. And just as a reminder, I've already covered all the mesh modeling tools. So if you want to get familiar with any of these, I'll leave links to the episodes on the tools we're using today to 3D model the chocolate in the description. So now that we have that all ready to go, let's use the inset tool, MW. So MW for inset. We don't want preserve groups on because we want to inset each polygon individually instead of as one big group we're insetting. So I'm going to turn off preserve groups, and I would like to inset this about 0.15. And I'll hit apply. And that seems a little bit too much to me. I'll try 0.1 and see how that looks. So this feels better to me, but it's still a little bit too big. 0.05. That feels more realistic to what would be on actual chocolate. So now we can go ahead and also extrude this up. So again, MT is what we need. We no longer really need preserve groups on. We don't want to create caps because then we'll have some weird surfaces inside of our chocolate that aren't necessary. And I'll change our offset to 0.2. Extrude that up. Now, it may seem complicated. How are we going to scale all of these polygons? And we don't want to do it individually. Well, we can use the normal scale tool, and the hotkey for that is M-, and this scales each polygon individually based on its normal direction, which is usually perpendicular to the polygon itself. So I'm going to change this to be 75% smaller. So now we have some chocolate here, and it's looking pretty good. And one thing that's very important that this is missing is bevels. So we need to make some selections to this to do some bevels. I'm going to be using the Bevel Deformer here today. So I'll add in the Bevel Deformer, and you'll see there's this option to create selections. So we need to decide what exactly here we want to bevel, and I will select these all in the edge mode. Another fun tip is that if you want to select a tool and have it fall directly under what you initially had selected, you can actually use another hotkey for that. So if I have my plane selected and I want to add the Bevel Deformer within it, all I need to do is hold Shift while selecting Bevel, and you can see that it was automatically added within the hierarchy of the plane so that it will affect the plane. It needs to be within the hierarchy so that Cinema 4D knows this is affecting this. I'm going to turn off the bevel for right now because we need to decide what edges we are actually beveling. So I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to have my plane selected. I'll double click on it to name it chocolate. And initially you may look at this and think, oh, I don't want to select all of these. It's going to take forever. But it doesn't have to take forever. So I'm going to hit the middle mouse button here so we see all 4 views. And then I want to see the right view up close. So I'm going to middle click on this here. I want to be able to select through the object. So I'm going to turn off visible only so that I can select things that are also not visible to my eye. And I can control the size of the brush selection with the brackets here. I'll go ahead and select these. And the cool thing about this is I am, in fact, selecting all of those. So now they're all selected. We have a few more areas that we'd want to select. And we can do that with another hotkey, UL. So with UL, I can select loops. So I can select the inner loop here while holding Shift to add it to our selection. And I can just do that quickly for each chocolate. If you click on something you didn't mean to, you can always Command-Control-Z it to undo it real quick and continue along with your selecting journey here. So I'll go through all of these. Alrighty, so there we go. We have those, and we have 2 more loops left to go. So we have this loop here. I'll select that. And then we have this bottom loop there, so I'll select that. Now we have everything selected, and we want to store our selection so that we don't have to do this all over again. So we go within the Select menu and down to Store Selection. Click on that right there, and we get this handy dandy little tag over here that says Edge Selection. So now that we have this all selected, we can turn on our bevel. We can have our bevel set to edges, and I will lock this so that it's easier to click on this and drag and drop this into here. And now we're only beveling the edges in our selection. Now we need to change how much this is being beveled. Let's try 0.05 or something like that. That's too much because that looks like some pretty big bevels. Let's try 0.01. That looks better. And we also want to have some subdivisions here so that this becomes nice and rounded. So we can increase the subdivisions 2 times, and then we get those in there. I'll leave the limit on for now. You can choose between fixed, distance, or radial. I like how radial looks. If you find that you're having these clipping issues, a really easy way to fix that is Control D to go into your scene, settings, and under our display, you can see this is the same place where we adjusted the scale to inches. I'll change the display from medium to small, and now we can see again. So that's a useful tip for you. I'm going to unlock this. And this is looking great and is totally usable, except for one smart little thing that we still need to do. We need to create more edges and subdivide this further, actually, so that when we go ahead and deform this with the melt deformer, that there's enough geometry, enough detail there for us to get some uneven surfaces and a little bit of a noise effect in there. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in greater depth in a moment. But for right now, we need to go in here and add in more loops. So we can do that with ML. And if I hold Shift, you'll see that this snaps to increments. I'm going to click here. And if I'd like to add in additional loops, I can just press this plus button. So I'll press it 3 times, maybe 4. That seems good. And I will do that for each of these columns of chocolate. I don't think that I pressed it enough times here. I'll go back and do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. I like to make each one even. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can also adjust this in here if that's quicker. And we want it to be able to deform both directions, so now we'll do the same thing going this way. And since we made that selection earlier, if I go back into model mode, you'll see that the only edges being beveled are the ones we had selected with our selection here. So regardless of how many more edges you add, it'll have that memory of which ones we're beveling. That's just useful to keep in mind for anything you're 3D modeling. Now that we have this chocolate here, we can go ahead and have it melt. So let's go into here and find our melt deformer. You can also find, oh, so here it is. You'll see it looks like a melting ice cream. So you can find it in there. You can also find it under Create Deformer, and you'll see that there's the melt down here. So it's a fun tool. And in order to have these working together, I'm going to do Alt-G to group them in a null. You can see it's already looking pretty melty there. And our melt deformer is right now positioned at the origin, which is at the center. It's also the bottom of our chocolate. At least it should be. Let me double check. Yes, so it is at the bottom of our chocolate. That's something important to keep in mind while using the melt deformer, is that you really need your chocolate's axis to be at the bottom, so that as it melts, it recognizes that it's melting to the bottom of that object. It just makes it look more accurate. And I'll rename this group chocolate group. Now we have a ton of settings in here. The first one is your strength. How much is this melting? How big is our strength? So the melted size, as you can see, as this melts, it kind of spreads out. Your melted size can control that. So I can adjust this to be a little bit smaller, like 105%. You can see it's not as big when it melts. It doesn't spread out as much. And that's helpful. Could even adjust this further. You can try in different amounts and just see how they look. So that's pretty good. You can adjust your radius. I'm going to try 1 inch for right now. And you'll see that what that does, if I go into the side view, is that the center point of your... So you can see that the center of what you're melting, the center point of the melt, the axis of the melt, is going to melt a little bit slower, the center point. And this radius is the area around that initial point that melts slower. So you can have a little bit of control over it like that. So that is what the radius is controlling. So for this tool, you actually need these to be turned up because they work with the noise scale. So you can see once I have those turned up and I increase this, that you can see the noise. And the higher you increase this, the smaller the noise is. And the lower it is, the bigger the noise is actually. So you can adjust the size of it, and then the radial randomness is kind of like the noise in the X and Z, and the vertical randomness is like the noise in the Y direction. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit there. I know those settings are a little bit confusing. And we can control all of this using fields. So if I go over into the field tab, you'll see that we can hold a click here and we'll see all of these different shapes of fields. And I could choose to use, for example, a linear field. I'm not going to go through all of the different fields there are today, but if you want to try them out, you can. And once we have this field, you can see that it's within here under the melt. And I can adjust its length to something a little bit smaller since this chocolate's smaller. So let's try 3. And I can rotate it around. So this field is telling Cinema 4D what part of this chocolate is all the way melted and what is the least melted, and you're controlling it with this field. So if I zoom out, you'll see this is the shape of it, and that this field is going this direction. So from here to here, this side is the most melted, the side is not melted. So if I zoom in on the chocolate here, and I move this field, you can see what impact that's having on the chocolate. And you can keyframe the position of this field in order to animate the chocolate melting. You can also keyframe all of the settings here within the Object tab. So yeah, that's basically how to make some melted chocolate. Now, if we want it to be melting on a surface, we can add in a plane. We can add in a material, so I'll add in a standard material here, and I'll rename this chocolate. I'll make this a dark brown color. could add this to the material. And we could create another standard material here for the surface. I'll just go ahead and make this white and add in some roughness here. We're going to need some more lights in here, so I'll go ahead and add in a dome light. I'll go into here, look for an HDRI, which is basically a spherical image that you can use to light up your scene. So I'll just pick one of these in here. These ones are studio lighting. I'll just drop this in here so that it knows that that's what we're using now. I can adjust its intensity, make it a little bit lighter. And I just grabbed that from the asset browser. You could add in additional lights as well, but this is basically what I want to show here today, are just the settings here for the melt deformer, and I thought it would be fun to 3D model some chocolate. So you can go ahead and try things out and get creative, and it's a really simple tool, but it's powerful here inside of Cinema 4D. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit like and subscribe if you'd like to be notified when more of these episodes come out. And thank you so much for taking the time to stay here and 3D model with me and try out these tools. I hope to see you here next time on Ambient 3D Animations.